The truck died 3 miles from Silver Ridge Ranch, sputtering out like it had finally given up on life. Lena Crowe sat behind the wheel for a long time after the engine quit, staring through the cracked windshield at the mountains rising ahead. They were brutal things, gray stone and snowpack, ridgelines sharp enough to draw blood from the sky. She didn't cry. She'd stopped doing that 2 years ago. Instead, she pulled her coat tighter, grabbed the duffel bag from the passenger seat, and started walking. The wind came at her sideways, mean and cold, the kind that found every gap in your clothes and reminded you that mercy wasn't something nature gave a damn about. Her boots crunched through ice and gravel. Her breath came out in clouds. By the time the ranch appeared in the distance, a scatter of low buildings and corrals tucked into the valley like something trying to hide from the world, her fingers were numb and her face felt like leather. But she kept walking. Because that's what Lena did. She kept walking. The main house was timber and stone, smoke rising from the chimney. A few trucks were parked out front, snow piled on their hoods. Off to the side sat a long, low building with a crooked sign that read, "Cookhouse." That's where she was headed. That's where she'd been told to go. She pushed through the front door of the main house and was hit with a wall of heat and noise. Men were gathered around a table, cards in their hands, bottles scattered between them. The smell was sweat and wood smoke, and something greasy frying in the back. Every head turned toward her. Silence dropped like a stone. Lena stood there, snow melting off her shoulders, duffel bag in hand. She didn't smile, didn't apologize for the cold she'd let in, just waited. A man at the head of the table set down his cards. He was older, maybe 60, with a face like weathered granite and a beard gone mostly gray. His eyes were sharp, the kind that didn't miss much. "Help you?" he said. "I'm looking for Hank Collier." "That's me." "I'm Lena Crowe. You posted for a cook." Hank's eyes flicked over her, taking in her size, her worn-out coat, the way she stood like she was used to doors being slammed in her face. One of the men at the table snorted. Another muttered something under his breath. Lena didn't look at them. "You got experience?" Hank asked. 6 years, diner work, catering, line cook. I can feed 30 men 3 times a day and not burn the place down." "That right?" "That's right." Hank leaned back in his chair, scratching his beard. "Where are you coming from?" "South." "That's supposed to mean something?" "It means I'm here now." Another snort from the table. A younger guy, maybe 25, with a crooked grin and a black Stetson pushed back on his head. "Boss, you really gonna let her cook for us? She looks like she'd eat half the supplies before they hit the stove." Laughter rippled through the room. Not loud, not cruel, just casual, the kind of joke men made when they didn't think it mattered. Lena's jaw tightened, but she didn't move. Hank held up a hand and the laughter died. "That's enough, Cody." "Just saying, Cess." "I said enough." Cody shrugged, still grinning, and went back to his cards. Hank looked at Lena again, something unreadable in his expression. "Cookhouse is out back," he said finally. "You can start tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. Breakfast is at 6. You screw it up, you're gone. Understood?" "Understood." "Bunkhouse is across the yard. You'll have your own room. Keep to yourself, do your job, and we won't have problems." Lena nodded. Hank waved her off, and she turned and walked back out into the cold. Behind her, she heard Cody's voice again, low and amused. "This ought to be good." The cookhouse was a long, narrow building with a wood stove at one end and a row of mismatched tables running down the middle. The kitchen was cramped. 2 gas burners, a grill, a sink that looked like it had seen better decades. Pots and pans hung from hooks on the wall, dented and blackened with use. The floor was scarred wood, the windows fogged with grease. It was a dump. Lena set her duffel down and walked through slowly, taking inventory. The pantry was stocked: flour, rice, canned goods, a side of beef hanging in the cold room out back. There was coffee, lots of it, and enough potatoes to feed an army. The tools were old but functional. The stove worked. The grill had seen some abuse, but it'd hold up. She could work with this. She spent the next hour cleaning, scrubbing down the counters, wiping out the cabinets, sweeping the floor. By the time she was done, the place didn't look new, but it looked like someone gave a damn. She found a cot in the back room, barely more than a closet, and made it up with the thin blanket she'd brought. No heat back here, but she'd slept in worse. That night she lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind hammer the walls. Somewhere outside a dog barked. A truck engine coughed to life and then faded into the distance. She thought about Cody's joke, about the way the men had looked at her, about the 100 other times she'd walked into a room and felt the weight of judgment before she'd even opened her mouth. She thought about leaving, but she didn't, because that's what Lena did. She stayed. 5 a.m. came hard and cold. Lena was already up, the stove roaring, coffee brewing in a dented percolator that looked older than she was. She'd found eggs, bacon, bread, simple, clean, no room for error. By the time the men started filtering in at 6, the tables were set, and the smell of food hung thick in the air. They came in loud, stomping snow off their boots, talking and laughing. The noise died when they saw her standing behind the counter, apron tied tight, a cast iron skillet in one hand. "Morning," she said. Nobody answered. They took their seats, eyeing the food like it might bite them. Lena started serving, plates piled with scrambled eggs, bacon crisp and salty, toast buttered and golden. She moved efficiently, no wasted motion, no hesitation. The men ate in silence, forks scraping plates, coffee mugs clattering. Halfway through the meal, Cody looked up. "Not bad," he said, grudging. Lena didn't respond. Another man, older, grizzled, with a scar running down his cheek, grunted his agreement. "Better than the last guy." "Last guy couldn't cook worth a damn," someone else muttered. "Last guy also didn't look like he'd eat us out of house and home." Laughter again, quieter this time, but it was there. Lena kept her face neutral, kept moving, kept working. She didn't need their approval. She just needed them to eat and get the hell out. And they did. One by one, they finished, dropped their plates in the sink, and headed out into the cold. Hank was the last to leave. He paused at the door, looked back at her. "You did good," he said. Lena nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Winter's just getting started." He left. The door slammed shut. Lena stood alone in the cookhouse, surrounded by dirty dishes and the fading warmth of the stove. She allowed herself a small, grim smile. Day 1 down. The days blurred together after that. Up before dawn, coffee on, breakfast ready by 6. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, biscuits, and gravy. Whatever she could pull together with what they had. The men ate, complained about the weather, complained about the work, and left. Lunch was simpler. Sandwiches, soup, something hot and fast. Dinner was the real test. Stews, roasts, cornbread, pies when she had the energy. She learned their rhythms, their appetites, their moods. She learned their names too, though most of them didn't bother learning hers. There was Cody, the loudmouth with the black Stetson and the easy grin. He was young, cocky, the kind of guy who thought he was funnier than he was. He made jokes about her size, about her silence, about the way she moved through the kitchen like a ghost. She ignored him. There was Dutch, the older man with the scar. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. He was fair, steady, the kind of guy who'd been doing this his whole life and didn't see the point in pretending it was glamorous. There was TJ, who was barely 20 and still learning how to stay on a horse. He was polite, nervous, always the first to say thank you and the last to leave a mess. And then there was Rhett Calder. She didn't notice him at first. He sat at the far end of the table, away from the others, ate in silence, and left without a word. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. His eyes were gray, cold, the kind that looked through you instead of at you. He never joked, never complained, never said a word to her. But he watched. She'd catch him sometimes, out of the corner of her eye, his gaze lingering on her for just a moment before he looked away. It wasn't lecherous, wasn't curious. It was something else, something she couldn't name. It made her uneasy. 3 weeks in, the first storm hit. It came down out of the mountains like a freight train, howling and vicious, dropping snow so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. The men holed up in the bunkhouse, and Lena stayed in the cookhouse, keeping the stove going, making sure there was hot coffee and food ready whenever someone braved the cold. She was restocking the pantry when she heard the door open. She turned, expecting Hank or maybe TJ. It was Rhett. He stood in the doorway, snow dusted across his shoulders, his face half hidden by the collar of his coat. He didn't say anything, just looked at her. "Need something?" Lena asked. He hesitated, then he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Stove's running low on wood," he said. His voice was low, rough, like he didn't use it much. "I know. I'll get more after lunch. I'll get it. You don't have to. I'll get it." He turned and walked out before she could argue. Half an hour later, he came back with an armload of split logs and stacked them neatly by the stove. He didn't look at her, didn't wait for thanks, just left again, the door closing softly behind him. Lena stood there, staring at the wood, feeling something strange twist in her chest. She didn't know what to make of Rhett Calder. The whispers started a week later. She didn't hear them at first, didn't know they were happening until TJ mentioned it one morning while dropping off his plate. "Hey, Lena?" he said, voice low, nervous. She looked up from the sink. "Yeah? Just ignore the guys if they say anything weird, okay? They're just bored." "Say anything weird about what?" TJ shifted on his feet, looking like he regretted opening his mouth. "Just, rumors. People talk." "What kind of rumors?" "I don't know. Something about why you came here, about your past or whatever. It's stupid. Don't worry about it." He left before she could press him, but the damage was done. She started noticing it then. The way conversation stopped when she walked into the room. The way Cody smirked at her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way Dutch watched her with something that might have been pity. Someone had been digging. Someone had found out about her. About the diner. About the lawsuit. About the night she'd been accused of stealing from the register and dragged through the local news like a common criminal. Never mind that the charges had been dropped. Never mind that the real thief had been the owner's nephew. The story stuck. The shame stuck. And now it was here. In this godforsaken ranch, in the middle of nowhere, because nowhere was ever far enough. She kept her head down, kept cooking, kept working, but the cold in the cookhouse had nothing to do with the weather anymore. It was Cody who finally said it out loud. Dinner service, 2 weeks after TJ's warning. The men were eating, the usual noise and chatter filling the room. Lena was clearing plates when Cody leaned back in his chair and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "So, Lena, heard you got fired from your last job. That true?" The room went quiet. Lena didn't stop moving, didn't look at him, just kept stacking plates. "I'm talking to you," Cody said, grinning. "Or are you going to ignore me like you ignore everyone else?" "Leave it alone, Cody," Dutch said, voice flat. "What?" "I'm just asking a question. She got fired, right? For stealing?" Lena's hands tightened on the plates. Her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears. "I said leave it alone." "Why? She hiding something?" "Cody. Maybe that's why she's here. Middle of nowhere, no references, no one asking questions. Seems convenient." Lena set the plates down carefully, turned to face him. "You done?" she asked. Cody's grin widened. "Just getting started." "Then let me save you some time. Yeah, I got fired. And yeah, I was accused of stealing. Charges were dropped because I didn't do it. But people like you don't care about that, do you? You just care about the story. About having something to throw in someone's face when you're bored." She stepped closer. Cody's grin faltered. "So here's the deal," Lena said, voice cold. "You want to talk about me? Fine. Do it when I'm not in the room. But if you're going to sit at my table, eat my food, and then spit in my face, you can get the hell out." Silence. Cody opened his mouth, closed it, looked around the table for backup. No one met his eyes. Lena turned and walked back to the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Dutch mutter, "Told you to leave it alone." "Jesus," Cody said, trying to laugh it off. "I was just joking." "Didn't sound like a joke," TJ said quietly. The conversation moved on. Lena stood at the sink, hands braced on the counter, breathing hard. She didn't cry. She'd stopped doing that 2 years ago. That night, she sat alone in the cookhouse, the stove burning low, a cup of cold coffee in her hands. The wind rattled the windows. The shadows stretched long and dark. She thought about leaving. She thought about packing her bag, walking back down that frozen road, and disappearing into whatever came next. But then the door opened. Rhett stepped inside. He didn't knock. Didn't ask permission. Just closed the door behind him and stood there, snow melting off his coat. "You okay?" he asked. Lena looked at him, surprised. "Why do you care?" "I don't know." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I got." She laughed, bitter and tired. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." "Yeah, well, I'm still here. That counts for something." Rhett crossed the room and sat down at one of the tables. He didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there, hands folded, eyes on the stove. "They'll get over it," he said finally. "Will they?" "Probably not, but they'll shut up about it eventually." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No." Lena shook her head, almost smiling despite herself. "You're not very good at this." "At what?" "Comforting people." "Never claimed to be." They sat in silence. Outside the wind howled. Inside the stove crackled and popped. "Why'd you come here?" Lena asked. "What?" "To the ranch. You don't seem like you want to be here." Rhett's jaw tightened. "Same reason you did, probably." "Which is?" "Nowhere else to go." Lena nodded slowly. "Yeah, that sounds about right." Rhett stood, pulling his coat tighter. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long." "They're all long." "Yeah, they are." He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. "For what it's worth," he said, not looking at her, "I don't believe what they're saying about you. You don't even know me." "No, but I know men like Cody. And I know what it looks like when someone's running from something that wasn't their fault." He left before she could respond. Lena sat there in the dark, staring at the door, feeling something crack open inside her chest. Something she'd kept locked down for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Hope. Dangerous, stupid, fragile hope. She hated it. But she didn't push it away. The storm broke 3 days later, leaving the ranch buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. The men dug out the corrals, cleared the paths, cursed the cold in the mountains and their own foolishness for taking a job this far from civilization. Lena kept the cookhouse running, kept the stove hot, kept the food coming. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, things began to shift. Dutch started saying good morning. TJ asked if she needed help with the dishes. Even Cody, sullen and embarrassed, muttered something that might have been an apology when he thought no one was listening. But it was Rhett who changed the most. He started showing up earlier, staying later. He'd bring in wood without being asked. He'd fix things that were broken. A loose hinge on the pantry door, a crack in the window frame. He didn't talk much, but he was there. And Lena, despite herself, started to notice. The way his hands moved when he worked. Steady, sure, scarred from years of hard labor. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, like what she said actually mattered. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle he didn't have all the pieces to. It scared her, because she knew what happened when you let someone in. You gave them a weapon. You showed them where you were soft, where you could be hurt. And she'd been hurt enough for one lifetime. But Rhett didn't push, didn't ask for anything, just kept showing up, quiet and solid, like a mountain that wasn't going anywhere. And against every instinct she had, Lena started to trust him. It was mid-February when everything started to unravel. The cold had settled in deep, the kind that made metal brittle and skin crack and breath freeze in your lungs. The men were restless, cabin fever setting in, tempers short. Fights broke out over stupid things, cards, work assignments, who ate the last of the cornbread. Hank tried to keep the peace, but even he was wearing thin. And then the accusations started. Someone's wallet went missing. Then a watch. Then $50 from the poker pot. Nothing huge, nothing worth calling the law over, but enough to make everyone suspicious, enough to make them start looking at each other sideways. And because the world was cruel and predictable, they started looking at Lena. It started with glances, then whispers. Then Cody, drunk and bitter one night, stood up in the middle of dinner and said it plain, "Maybe it's her. Wouldn't be the first time, would it?" The room went silent. Lena stood at the counter, a pot of stew in her hands, and felt the world tilt sideways. "What did you just say?" Dutch asked, voice dangerous. "You heard me? She got fired for stealing before. Why not now?" "That's enough," Hank said, standing. "Is it? Or are we all just going to pretend we don't know what she is?" "Cody, I swear to God. I didn't take anything, Lena said. Her voice was quiet, steady, but there was a tremor underneath it, a crack she couldn't quite hide. Sure you didn't, Cody sneered. I didn't. Then where's the money? I don't know. Convenient. Cody, sit down, Rhett said. It was the first time he'd spoken all night. His voice cut through the noise like a blade, cold and sharp. Cody turned to him, surprised. Stay out of this, Calder. Sit. Down. Cody stared at him. Then he laughed, ugly and bitter. Oh, I get it. You're defending her. That's real sweet, Rhett. You got a thing for her or something? Rhett stood. Last chance. Or what? Rhett didn't answer. He just moved, fast, sudden, closing the distance between them before Cody could react. He grabbed him by the front of his shirt and slammed him against the wall hard enough to rattle the windows. You want to accuse someone? Rhett said, voice low and deadly. You better have proof, otherwise shut your mouth. Cody's face had gone white. Let go of me. Apologize. What? Apologize. Now. Cody looked around the room, desperate for backup. No one moved. Even Hank just stood there, arms crossed, watching. I'm sorry, Cody muttered. Louder. I'm sorry, Cody snapped. Jesus, are you happy? Rhett let him go. Cody stumbled back, breathing hard, and stalked out of the cookhouse without another word. The room stayed quiet. Rhett turned to Lena. You okay? She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Anyone else got something to say? Rhett asked, looking around the table. No one did. The men finished their dinner in silence and left one by one. Hank was the last to go. He paused at the door, looked back at Lena. I don't think you took anything, he said, for what it's worth. Thank you, Lena said quietly. He nodded and left. Rhett stayed. He helped her clean up, washing dishes, wiping down tables, banking the stove for the night. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. When they were done, Lena finally said, You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did. Why? Rhett looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected, guilt. Because I owe you, he said. You don't owe me anything. Yeah, I do. He left before she could ask what he meant. Lena stood alone in the cookhouse, her heart pounding, her mind racing. And for the first time in a long time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. The next morning came too early and too cold. Lena woke before the alarm, her breath clouding in the frozen air of the back room. She could hear the wind still battering the walls, relentless as ever. For a moment, she considered staying in bed, pulling the thin blanket over her head and pretending the world outside didn't exist. But she didn't. She got up, dressed in the dark, and went to work. The stove was stubborn, refusing to catch at first. She coaxed it along with kindling and patience, watching the flames slowly take hold. Coffee went on. Bacon hit the skillet. Biscuits into the oven. The routine was mechanical now, her hands moving without thought while her mind churned through everything that had happened the night before. Cody's accusation. The silence from the other men. Rhett slamming him against the wall. Because I owe you. What the hell did that mean? She didn't have time to dwell on it. The men started filtering in at 6, quieter than usual, the tension from last night still hanging in the air like smoke. They took their seats without the usual banter. Cody wasn't there, probably nursing his pride in the bunkhouse. Lena served breakfast in silence. Eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy. Nobody complained. Nobody thanked her either. They just ate and left, one by one, until only Rhett remained. He sat at his usual spot at the far end of the table, picking at the last of his eggs. Lena was wiping down the counter when he finally spoke. You sleep okay? She glanced at him. Not really. Yeah, me neither. He stood, brought his plate to the sink. Lena took it from him, their fingers brushing for just a second. She pulled back quickly, unsettled by the contact. About last night, she started. Don't, Rhett said, cutting her off. Don't thank me, don't apologize, just don't. I wasn't going to thank you. He looked at her, surprised. I was going to ask why you did it, Lena said, and what you meant when you said you owed me. Rhett's jaw tightened. He looked away, out the window at the snow-covered yard. Doesn't matter. It does to me. Lena, you can't just say something like that and then walk away. That's not fair. Fair? Rhett's laugh was bitter, humorless. Nothing about this is fair. Then tell me. He was quiet for a long time. So long that Lena thought he wasn't going to answer. But then he turned back to her, and the look in his eyes was raw, unguarded in a way she'd never seen before. I knew you, he said. Before. Not well, but I knew you. Lena's stomach dropped. What? 3 years ago. You were working at that diner in Ridgefield, the one on Route 9. She stared at him, her mind racing. Ridgefield. The diner. The night everything fell apart. I was passing through, Rhett continued, his voice low. Stopped for coffee. I was sitting in the back when it happened. When the owner came out and started yelling at you in front of everyone. Said you stole from the register. Called the cops right there. Lena's hands gripped the edge of the sink. Her pulse was thundering in her ears. I saw the whole thing, Rhett said. Saw you trying to explain. Saw him cut you off, humiliate you. Saw the way everyone in that place just sat there and watched. And He stopped, swallowed hard. I didn't do anything, he said. I just sat there like everyone else. Drank my coffee and left. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I didn't know you, didn't know the situation, that it was easier to just walk away. Lena couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The memory of that night crashed over her like a wave. The shame, the fear, the way the other customers had stared at her like she was something dirty. I found out later the charges got dropped, Rhett said, that it wasn't you, but by then you were gone, and I never forgot. Never forgot the way you looked that night. Never forgot that I could have said something, could have stood up for you, and I didn't. He looked at her, and the guilt in his eyes was so heavy it made her chest ache. So yeah, he said quietly, I owe you. I owed you 3 years ago, and I still owe you now. And I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen again. Lena didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process what she was hearing. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him it was too late, that his guilt didn't change anything. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, understood, because she'd been that person too. The one who looked away when it was easier, the one who told herself it wasn't her problem. Why didn't you say anything before? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I'm a coward, Rhett said simply, and because I didn't think you'd want to hear it. I don't. I know. They stood there in the quiet cookhouse, the space between them heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the stove crackled softly. I'm not looking for forgiveness, Rhett said finally. I don't deserve it. I needed you to know. That's all. He turned to leave. Rhett, Lena said. He stopped, hand on the door. Thank you, she said, for last night, and for telling me the truth. He nodded once, then walked out into the cold. Lena stood alone, her hands shaking, her mind spinning. She wanted to cry, wanted to throw something, wanted to scream at the universe for being so goddamn unfair. But she didn't do any of those things. She just went back to work. Because that's what Lena did. She kept going. The days that followed were strange. The tension in the cookhouse eased slightly, but it never fully disappeared. Cody stayed out of her way, avoiding eye contact whenever they crossed paths. The other men treated her with a cautious respect, like she was a bomb that might go off if they said the wrong thing. And Rhett kept his distance. He still showed up to help with the wood, still fixed things that needed fixing, but the quiet understanding they'd started to build felt fractured now, complicated by the weight of what he'd told her. Lena didn't know how to feel about him, didn't know if she could trust him or if she even wanted to. But she couldn't stop thinking about him either. It was Dutch who finally broke the ice. He came into the cookhouse one afternoon while Lena was prepping dinner, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. Got a second? He asked. Lena looked up from the potatoes she was peeling. Sure, what's up? Dutch set the thermos down and slid the paper across the counter. It was a list of names, supplies they needed from town. Hank's sending someone down the mountain next week, Dutch said. Figured you might want to add anything to the list. Lena scanned the paper. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt. The basics. She grabbed a pencil and added a few things. Yeast, canned tomatoes, spices. Thanks, she said, handing it back. Dutch didn't leave. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You doing okay?" he asked. Lena glanced at him, surprised. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because the last 2 weeks have been hell, and you've been holding it together better than most of us." She shrugged. "Not much choice." "There's always a choice. You could have left." "Yeah, well, I didn't." Dutch nodded slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. "For what it's worth, I don't think you took anything." "Never did." "I know. And Cody's an idiot." Lena smiled despite herself. "Yeah, he is. Rhett's not, though." The smile faded. Lena focused on the potatoes, her hands moving a little faster. "He's a good man," Dutch continued. "Quiet, keeps to himself. But he's solid. You can count on him when it matters." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see the way he looks at you. And I see the way you look at him when you think no one's watching." Lena's hands stilled. I'm not blind, Lena. Neither are the rest of us." Dutch set his cup down. "I'm just saying, look, whatever's going on between you two, don't let the past get in the way. Life's too short for that." He left before she could respond. Lena stood there, staring at the half-peeled potato in her hand, her mind racing. Was it that obvious? She thought she'd been careful, thought she'd kept her guard up, kept her feelings locked down where they couldn't hurt her. But maybe she hadn't been as careful as she thought. That night, after the dishes were done and the cookhouse was quiet, Lena found herself standing at the window, staring out at the snow-covered yard. The bunkhouse lights were on, warm yellow squares against the darkness. She wondered which window was Rhett's, wondered if he was awake, wondered if he was thinking about her too. She hated how much she cared. The knock on the door startled her. She turned, half expecting to see Hank or maybe TJ with some late-night request. It was Rhett. He stood in the doorway, snow dusted across his shoulders, his face half hidden in shadow. "Can I come in?" he asked. Lena hesitated, then she stepped aside. He closed the door behind him and stood there awkwardly, like he didn't know what to do with his hands. "I shouldn't have told you," he said finally. "About Ridgefield. About what I saw. It wasn't fair to dump that on you." "You're right," Lena said. "It wasn't. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I needed to hear it." Rhett looked at her, surprised. "I spent 3 years carrying that night around," Lena said, "thinking I was the only one who remembered, thinking I was crazy for not being able to let it go. But you were there. You saw it. And that matters. It shouldn't have taken me this long to say something." "No, it shouldn't have. But you did say something, and that's more than most people would do." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them easing just slightly. "Dutch thinks I'm an idiot," Rhett said. Lena raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I'm standing here trying to apologize when I should just shut up and ask you if you want to take a walk." "A walk? It's freezing out there." "Yeah, but the stars are out, and it's quiet. And I thought, I don't know, maybe we could both use the air." Lena looked at him, really looked at him, at the uncertainty in his eyes, the way he held himself like he was bracing for rejection. She should say no, should tell him it was too complicated, too risky, too much. But she didn't. "Okay," she said. "Let me get my coat." They walked through the snow in silence, their breath clouding in the frozen air. The ranch was quiet, everyone else tucked away for the night. Above them, the sky was a blanket of stars, so bright and clear it almost hurt to look at. "I grew up in Wyoming," Rhett said after a while. "Little town called Clearwater. Population 200 on a good day. What brought you here?" "Same thing that brings everyone here. Needed work, needed to disappear for a while." "From what?" Rhett was quiet for a long time. "From myself, mostly." Lena didn't push. She understood that kind of running. "I had a wife," Rhett said suddenly. "Her name was Sarah. We got married young, too young probably, but we were happy. Or I thought we were." Lena glanced at him, surprised. He'd never mentioned a wife before. "We had a son," Rhett continued, his voice tight. "Jacob. He was 3 when it happened." "When what happened?" "Car accident. Black ice on Route 14. I was supposed to be driving that night, but I was too tired. Told Sarah to take the wheel. She did. And then..." He stopped. swallowed hard. They didn't make it, he said quietly. Sarah died on impact. Jacob held on for 2 days, but in the end, Lena's chest tightened. Rhett, I'm so sorry. That was 5 years ago, and I've been running ever since, telling myself it wasn't my fault, that there was nothing I could have done. But the truth is, I was supposed to protect them, and I didn't. He looked at her, his eyes wet with unshed tears. That's why I couldn't walk away from you, he said. Not again, because I know what it's like to stand by and do nothing. And I'm done being that person. Lena didn't know what to say, didn't know how to comfort someone carrying that kind of pain. So she did the only thing she could think of. She reached out and took his hand. Rhett looked down at their joined hands, surprised. Then he squeezed gently, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. They stood there in the snow, two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole again. And for the first time in a long time, Lena didn't feel quite so alone. They walked back to the cookhouse slowly, neither of them in a hurry to let go. When they reached the door, Rhett finally released her hand, stepping back into the cold. Thanks, he said, for listening. Any time. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, but then he just nodded and turned to leave. Rhett, Lena called after him. He stopped, looked back. You're not a coward, she said. And you're not a bad person. You're just human, like the rest of us. Rhett's throat worked. Then he smiled, small, sad, but real. Good night, Lena. Good night. She watched him disappear into the darkness, then went inside and closed the door. That night, she slept better than she had in weeks. The following days passed in a blur of cold and work and small, stolen moments. Rhett started joining her in the cookhouse after dinner, helping with the cleanup and staying to talk. They didn't discuss anything heavy, just small things, stories from their pasts, books they'd read, places they'd been. It was easy, comfortable, like something she'd been missing without knowing it. The other men noticed, of course. TJ gave her knowing looks. Dutch smirked whenever Rhett lingered a little too long. Even Cody, still sulking and bitter, muttered something about Calder finally growing a pair. Lena ignored them all. She was learning to trust again, learning to let someone in, and it scared the hell out of her. But it also felt like breathing after being underwater for years. Then the money turned up. It was Hank who found it, tucked inside a toolbox in the storage shed, wrapped in a greasy rag. $50 and a gold watch. Exactly what had gone missing. He called everyone into the main house that night, his face grim. Found the missing items, he said, holding up the watch. They were in Cody's toolbox. The room erupted. That's bullshit, Cody shouted, standing up so fast his chair toppled over. I didn't put that there. Then how'd it get there? Dutch asked, his voice flat. I don't know. Someone's setting me up. Who would do that? Cody's eyes swept the room, desperate. Then they landed on Lena. Her, he said, pointing. It was her. She's been trying to get back at me since that night. Lena's blood ran cold. What? You heard me. You wanted to make me look bad, so you planted that stuff in my toolbox. That's insane, Lena said, her voice shaking. Why would I do that? Because you're a thief. That's what you do. Cody, shut your mouth, Rhett said, his voice dangerous. Or what? You gonna hit me again? You gonna defend her no matter what, just because you're... Because she didn't do it, TJ interrupted. Everyone turned to look at him. The kid was pale, his hands trembling. What? Hank asked. She didn't do it, TJ said again, louder this time. I did. The room went silent. What are you talking about? Dutch asked. TJ swallowed hard. I took the money. And the watch. I was going to pawn it next time we went to town. I had debts. Stupid debts from before I came here. And I thought... He trailed off, looking sick. I put it in Cody's toolbox because I panicked, TJ continued. I heard Hank was going to search the bunkhouse, and I didn't know where else to hide it. I didn't think it would go this far. Cody stared at him, his face red. You son of a... Sit down, Hank said, his voice like iron. All of you. They sat. Hank turned to TJ, his expression unreadable. You're fired, Hank said. Pack your things. You're gone first thing tomorrow. TJ nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't cut it, kid. Get out of my sight. TJ stood and stumbled out of the room. The door slammed behind him. Hank turned to Cody. And you're on thin ice. One more word about Lena, and you're gone too. Understood? Cody's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Good. Now all of you get out. The men filed out, subdued and quiet. Lena stood to leave, but Hank stopped her. Lena, hold on. She turned back, her heart pounding. I owe you an apology, Hank said. I should have shut this down sooner, should have trusted my gut instead of letting the rumors fester. That's on me. It's okay, Lena said quietly. No, it's not. But I'm grateful you stuck it out. A lot of people would have left. I thought about it. But you didn't. That says something. Lena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Hank sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day. Yes, sir. She walked back to the cookhouse, her legs shaky, her mind reeling. TJ had taken the money. TJ, who'd been nothing but polite and kind, who'd thanked her every morning and never left a mess. It was a reminder that you never really knew people. Not completely. Rhett was waiting for her outside the cookhouse, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. You okay? He asked. I don't know, Lena said honestly. I don't know. Relieved, I guess, but also sad. For TJ? Yeah, he's just a kid. He made a stupid mistake. He let you take the blame for it. I know, but I've made stupid mistakes too. Rhett pushed off the wall and stepped closer. You're too forgiving. Maybe. Or maybe I just know what it's like to be desperate. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and brushed a strand of hair away from her face, his touch gentle, tentative. You're a good person, Lena Crowe, he said softly. Better than most. Lena's breath caught. I'm not. You are. He leaned in, and for a moment she thought he was going to kiss her. Her heart hammered in her chest, but instead he pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. I'm glad you stayed, he whispered. Me too, Lena whispered back. They stood there in the cold, holding each other up, two people who'd been broken by the world, and were slowly learning how to be whole again. And for the first time, Lena let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. But the world, as she was about to learn, had other plans. The fire started 3 nights later. Lena smelled the smoke before she saw the flames. She'd been asleep, a deep, dreamless sleep for once, when something pulled her awake. Not a sound, not a noise, just a wrongness in the air, thick and acrid, crawling into her lungs. Her eyes snapped open. The back room was hazy, gray smoke curling along the ceiling like fingers. For a split second, she thought she was still dreaming. Then she heard it, the crackle and roar of fire, hungry and growing. She threw off the blanket and stumbled out of the back room into the main cookhouse. Heat hit her like a fist. The far wall was engulfed, flames licking up the timber beams, spreading across the ceiling in bright orange veins. The stove had been knocked over, or maybe it had exploded, she couldn't tell, and fire was pouring out of it like water from a burst dam. Jesus, Lena gasped, choking on the smoke. She ran for the front door, but the flames had already spread there too, blocking her path. The windows. She could break the windows. She grabbed a chair and swung it hard against the nearest pane. The glass shattered, and cold air rushed in, but it only fed the fire. The flames roared louder, hotter, climbing the walls with terrifying speed. Lena stumbled backward, coughing, her eyes streaming. The smoke was so thick now she could barely see. Her lungs burned, her head swam. She tried to think, tried to find another way out, but the heat was overwhelming, pressing down on her like a weight. She sank to her knees, gasping for air that wasn't there. This is it, she thought. This is how it ends. Not with dignity, not with closure, just smoke and fire in a cookhouse nobody would remember. Then the door exploded inward. Rhett came through it like a freight train, his coat pulled up over his mouth and nose, his eyes wild. He scanned the room, found her crumpled on the floor, and didn't hesitate. He crossed the space in 3 strides, grabbed her under the arms, and hauled her up. Come on! He shouted over the roar of the flames. Lena tried to move, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Rhett didn't wait. He scooped her up, one arm under her knees, the other around her back, and carried her toward the door. The heat was insane. The smoke so thick it was like drowning. Lena buried her face against his chest, her lungs screaming. They hit the cold night air, and Rhett kept running, carrying her across the snow-covered yard until they were far enough away that the heat wasn't clawing at their backs. He set her down gently, and Lena collapsed onto her hands and knees, coughing so hard she thought her ribs would crack. Behind them, the cookhouse was a tower of flame, lighting up the night sky like a second sun. Men were pouring out of the bunkhouse now, shouting, running for buckets and hoses. But it was already too late. The fire had taken hold, and the cookhouse was old timber and dry wood. It wouldn't be saved. Rhett knelt beside Lena, his hand on her back. "Breathe," he said, his voice rough. "Just breathe." Lena tried. Her lungs felt like sandpaper. Her throat was raw, but she was alive. She was breathing. "What the hell happened?" Hank's voice, sharp and urgent, cutting through the chaos. Rhett looked up at him. "I don't know. I was in the bunkhouse, heard someone yell fire, and saw the smoke. Lena was inside." Hank's face was pale. "Anyone else in there?" "No, just her." "You sure?" "I'm sure." Hank ran a hand through his hair, staring at the burning building. "Christ, we're going to lose the whole thing." "Better the building than her," Dutch said, appearing at Hank's side with a bucket in hand. He looked at Lena. "You okay, kid?" Lena nodded, still coughing. "Can you stand?" She tried. Her legs were shaky, but Rhett helped her up, keeping an arm around her waist to steady her. She leaned into him without thinking, her body still trembling from the adrenaline. "Get her to the main house," Hank said. "Dutch, Cody, form a line. We need to keep this from spreading to the other buildings." The men scrambled into action, passing buckets of water in a desperate attempt to contain the blaze. But Lena could see it was futile. The cookhouse was already gone. Rhett guided her toward the main house, his grip firm but gentle. She didn't protest, didn't have the energy to. She just let him lead her, her mind still reeling. How had the fire started? The stove had been banked properly. She was sure of it. She'd done it 100 times before. Had something broken? Had she made a mistake? Or had someone done this on purpose? The thought hit her like a punch to the gut. Inside the main house, Rhett sat her down at the kitchen table and grabbed a blanket from the couch, draping it over her shoulders. He poured her a glass of water and set it in front of her. "Drink," he said. Lena picked up the glass with trembling hands and took a sip. The water was cold, soothing against her scorched throat. Rhett sat down across from her, his face smudged with soot, his eyes locked on hers. "You scared the hell out of me." "I scared myself," Lena said, her voice hoarse. "What happened?" "I don't know. I woke up and the whole place was on fire. The stove was knocked over, or I don't know. It happened so fast." Rhett frowned. "You banked the stove before bed?" "Of course I did." "And you didn't hear anything? No one moving around outside?" Lena shook her head. "I was asleep. I didn't hear anything until I smelled the smoke." Rhett's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to say something but was holding it back. "What?" Lena asked. "Nothing." "Don't do that. If you're thinking something, say it." Rhett hesitated. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. "That stove doesn't just knock itself over, and fires don't start themselves in the middle of the night." Lena's stomach twisted. "You think someone did this?" "I don't know what I think, but I'm going to find out." "Rhett, you could have died, Lena. If I hadn't gotten there when I did." "But you did." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" Rhett looked at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her chest ache. "The point is, I'm done watching bad things happen to you. I'm done standing by." Before Lena could respond, the door burst open and Hank walked in, his face grim. He looked at Lena, then at Rhett. "Fire's contained," Hank said. "Barely. Cookhouse is a total loss." "Anyone hurt?" Lena asked. "No, just property damage." Hank pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "I need to know what happened." "I don't know," Lena said. "I went to bed and the next thing I knew, the place was on fire." "You banked the stove?" "Yes." "You sure?" "Positive." Hank nodded slowly. "Rhett, you were the first one there. What'd you see?" "Door was still shut," Rhett said. "No sign of forced entry. But the stove was knocked over. Looked deliberate to me." Hank's expression darkened. You saying someone set this? I'm saying it's worth looking into. Who the hell would do that? Rhett didn't answer, but his eyes flicked toward the window, where Cody and the other men were still working to douse the last of the flames. Hank caught the look. You think Cody? I don't know what I think, Rhett said, but he's got a grudge, and he was real quiet when we were fighting the fire. Didn't see him grab a single bucket. That doesn't prove anything. No, but it's a start. Hank rubbed his face, exhausted. I'll talk to him in the morning. Right now, we need to figure out where the hell we're going to cook meals with no cookhouse. We can use the main house kitchen, Lena said. It's small, but it'll work. You sure you're up for that? I don't have a choice. Hank looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, get some rest. We'll sort this out in the morning. He stood and left, the door closing softly behind him. Lena and Rhett sat in silence. Outside, the last of the flames flickered and died, leaving only smoke and ash. You should sleep here tonight, Rhett said. There's a spare room upstairs. I'm fine. Lena, I'm fine, she repeated more firmly. I need a minute. Rhett studied her. Then he nodded and stood. I'll be in the bunkhouse if you need me. Rhett. He stopped, turned back. Thank you, Lena said quietly, for coming after me. I told you, I'm done standing by. He left, and Lena sat alone in the dark kitchen, the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, her mind spinning. Someone had tried to kill her, or at least scare her, drive her out. And they'd almost succeeded. The next morning came too soon. Lena woke on the couch in the main house, her body aching, her throat still raw. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flames, felt the heat, smelled the smoke. But she got up anyway, because that's what she did. The main house kitchen was cramped and outdated, but it had a stove and a sink and enough space to make it work. Lena started breakfast, simple, fast, nothing fancy. Eggs, bacon, toast, coffee, strong and bitter. The men filed in quietly, subdued by the events of the night before. They ate without the usual banter, glancing at Lena like she might shatter if they said the wrong thing. Cody was the last to arrive. He took a seat at the far end of the table, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Lena watched him from the kitchen, her gut churning. Had he done it? Had he really hated her enough to burn down the cookhouse with her inside? Hank walked in just as breakfast was wrapping up. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Cody, Hank said, my office, now! Cody's face went pale. Why? Just get up and come with me. Cody stood slowly, his hands balled into fists. He followed Hank out of the kitchen, and the door slammed shut behind them. The remaining men exchanged glances. You think he did it? Dutch asked, voice low. Don't know, Rhett said, but Hank's gonna find out. 20 minutes later, Cody stormed out of the main house, his face red, his jaw tight. He didn't look at anyone, just grabbed his coat and headed for the bunkhouse. Hank appeared in the doorway a moment later. Lena, Rhett, come here. They followed him into the small office off the kitchen. Hank closed the door and leaned against the desk, arms crossed. I talked to Cody, Hank said. He swears he didn't do it. Says he was in the bunkhouse all night and Dutch backs him up. Dutch could be lying, Rhett said. He's not. I know Dutch. He doesn't lie. Then who? I don't know, Hank interrupted. Could have been an accident. Could have been faulty equipment. Hell, could have been a stray ember from the stove. Point is, we don't have proof it was deliberate. The stove was knocked over, Rhett said, voice hard. Could have happened during the fire. Things shift when they burn. Or someone kicked it over. Maybe. But without proof, I can't go accusing people. Rhett's hands clenched. So that's it? We just move on? No, I'm keeping an eye on things, but I'm not starting a witch hunt without evidence. Hank looked at Lena. How you holding up? I'm fine, Lena said. You don't look fine. I'm still here. That's what matters. Hank nodded slowly. You're tougher than most, I'll give you that. But if you need time, I don't. All right, then let's get back to work. The days that followed were strange and tense. Lena cooked out of the main house kitchen, squeezing 3 meals a day out of a space barely big enough for one. The men adapted, but the loss of the cookhouse hung over the ranch like a shadow, and the whispers started again. Not about stealing this time. About the fire. about whether it had really been an accident, about whether Lena had brought bad luck with her, or worse, whether she'd done it herself for the insurance money. It was absurd, insulting. But it spread anyway, quiet and insidious. Lena felt it in the way the men looked at her, the way conversations stopped when she walked into a room, the way even Dutch, normally so steady, seemed uncertain around her. Only Rhett stayed constant. He helped her in the kitchen, hauled supplies, fixed broken equipment. He didn't care what the others thought, didn't care about the rumors. And slowly, over late nights and quiet conversations, Lena realized something that scared her more than the fire ever had. She was falling for him. It was a terrible idea. He was broken, haunted by a past he couldn't escape. She was damaged, carrying scars that would never fully heal. They were two people who had no business being together, but she couldn't help it. One night, after the dishes were done and the main house was quiet, Rhett found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the burned shell of the cookhouse. "You okay?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "No," Lena said honestly. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really." They sat in silence for a while. Then Lena said, "I think I should leave." Rhett went still. "What?" "I should leave. Go somewhere else, start over again." "Why?" "Because everywhere I go, things fall apart. People get hurt. Buildings burn down. It's like I'm cursed or something." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Think about it, Rhett. The diner, the ranch, the fire, it's always something. None of that was your fault. Doesn't matter. People think it was, and eventually they'll make me leave anyway. Might as well do it on my own terms." Rhett turned to face her, his expression fierce. "You're not cursed. You're just unlucky. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah, being cursed means you're doomed. Being unlucky means you've had a rough run, but it doesn't have to stay that way." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, what's the point?" Lena looked at him, and something in her chest cracked open. "Why do you care so much?" Rhett hesitated. Then he said, quietly, "Because I see you." "What?" "I see you, Lena. The real you. Not the person everyone else thinks you are. Not the rumors or the mistakes or the bad luck. I see the person who gets up every morning and keeps going, even when the world's trying to knock her down. I see the person who doesn't quit, no matter how hard it gets. And He stopped, swallowed hard. "I don't want to lose that," he said. "I don't want to lose you." Lena's breath caught. "Rhett, I know it's complicated. I know I've got my own mess to deal with. But I can't watch you walk away. Not without telling you that you matter. To me. More than I thought anyone could matter again." Tears pricked at Lena's eyes. She blinked them back, her throat tight. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Do what?" "Let someone in. Trust someone. I'm so used to being alone, I don't know if I remember how to be anything else." Rhett reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, rough with calluses. "You don't have to figure it out all at once. Just don't leave." "Not yet." Lena looked down at their joined hands. Then she looked up at him, at the hope and fear warring in his eyes. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll stay." Rhett's shoulders sagged with relief. He squeezed her hand gently, and they sat there in the cold, holding on to each other like lifelines. But even as Lena made the promise, a voice in the back of her head whispered that it was a mistake, that staying would only lead to more pain, more loss. She ignored it, because for once she wanted to believe that things could be different. That night Lena dreamed of fire again, but this time when she woke, Rhett was there, sitting in a chair beside the couch, keeping watch. "You don't have to do that," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "I know," Rhett said, "but I'm doing it anyway. What if something happens to you? What if nothing's going to happen?" "You don't know that." "No. But I'm not going to let fear stop me from doing the right thing. Not anymore." Lena sat up, the blanket pooling around her waist. "Why are you really here, Rhett? Why are you doing all this?" Rhett looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and crossed to the couch, kneeling beside it so they were eye level. "Because 3 years ago, I watched someone humiliate you, and I did nothing," he said. "And I've carried that with me every single day since. I can't undo the past. Can't take back the times I should have spoken up and didn't. But I can be here now. I can make sure that whatever happens next, you don't have to face it alone. That's not your responsibility. Maybe not. But it's my choice. Lena's eyes searched his face. What if I can't give you what you want? I'm not asking you to give me anything. I'm just asking you to let me stand beside you. That's all. Lena's throat tightened. She wanted to push him away, to tell him he was wasting his time, that she was too broken to be worth the effort. But she didn't. Instead, she reached out and cupped his face in her hand, her thumb brushing over the rough stubble on his jaw. You're a good man, Rhett Calder, she whispered. I'm trying to be. You already are. And then, before she could second-guess herself, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. Rhett froze for a heartbeat. Then he kissed her back, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, holding her like she was something precious. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. That was, Rhett started. A mistake, Lena finished, though she didn't sound convinced. Was it? I don't know, maybe. Or maybe it was the first thing that's felt right in a long time. Lena looked at him, at the honesty in his eyes, and felt her walls crumbling. Yeah, she said quietly. Maybe it was. They stayed like that for a while, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other in. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire in the hearth crackled softly. And for the first time in years, Lena felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. But hope, Lena learned, was a fragile thing, and the world had a way of crushing it before it could take root. The next morning started like any other. Lena was up before dawn, the kitchen already warm from the stove, coffee brewing in the old percolator. Her lips still tingled from the kiss, her heart still racing every time she thought about Rhett's hands in her hair, the way he'd looked at her like she was something worth saving. She told herself not to get carried away. Told herself it was just a moment, nothing more, but her traitorous heart wouldn't listen. The men filed in for breakfast, quieter than usual. Lena served scrambled eggs and bacon, toast with butter, coffee, black and strong. Cody sat at the far end of the table, sullen and withdrawn. Dutch was reading a week-old newspaper. TJ's seat sat empty. He'd left 2 days after the fire, and nobody had heard from him since. Rhett came in last, snow-dusted on his shoulders. His eyes found Lena immediately, and something passed between them, something warm and unspoken. She felt her cheeks flush and turned back to the stove, trying to hide the smile tugging at her lips. Morning, Rhett said, taking his usual seat. Morning, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She was pouring him coffee when Hank walked in, his face grim. The room went quiet. We got a problem, Hank said. Dutch set down his newspaper. What kind of problem? The kind that involves the sheriff and a whole lot of questions we don't have answers to. Lena's stomach dropped. What happened? Fire inspector came by yesterday. Did a full sweep of what's left of the cookhouse. Hank paused, his jaw tight. Found evidence of accelerant. Gasoline, looks like. Poured around the base of the stove. The room erupted. Men talking over each other, voices rising in shock and anger. Lena stood frozen at the counter, the coffee pot still in her hand. You're saying someone deliberately set that fire? Dutch asked, his voice cutting through the noise. That's exactly what I'm saying. Who the hell would do that? That's what the sheriff wants to know. He's coming up here this afternoon to interview everyone. Cody's face had gone white. You think it was me, don't you? That's what this is about. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Everyone's been looking at me sideways since it happened. Maybe because you've been acting guilty as hell, Rhett said, his voice flat. Cody stood up so fast his chair clattered to the floor. Screw you, Calder. I didn't do anything. Then why are you so defensive? Because everyone's already made up their minds. It's easier to blame me than admit maybe it was someone else. Like who? Dutch asked. Cody's eyes darted around the room, desperate. Then they landed on Lena. What about her? The room went silent. Lena felt like she'd been punched in the gut. What? You heard me. Maybe you did it yourself. Burned the place down for attention or insurance money or whatever. That's enough, Hank said, his voice like iron. Is it? Because it makes sense, doesn't it? She's the one who benefits most from— I said that's enough, Hank roared. Cody fell silent, his chest heaving. The other men were staring at him like he'd lost his mind. Get out, Hank said quietly. What? Pack your things. You're done here. You're firing me? For what? For being a coward and a bully. For making accusations you can't back up. For making this place more toxic than it already is. Get out. Cody's face twisted with rage and humiliation. He grabbed his coat and stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Hank turned to Lena. I'm sorry, that was out of line. Lena set the coffee pot down carefully, her hands shaking. It's fine. It's not fine. Then what do you want me to say? That I'm used to it? That people have been blaming me for things I didn't do my whole life? Because I am, Hank. I'm used to it. Her voice cracked on the last word. She turned away, blinking back tears, hating herself for showing weakness. Rhett stood. I'm going to go talk to her. Leave her alone, Dutch said quietly. She needs a minute. She needs someone who's not going to treat her like she's made of glass. Rhett followed Lena out of the kitchen, down the narrow hallway to the small storage room she'd been using as a makeshift office. She was standing with her back to the door, her shoulders rigid, her hands braced on the counter. Lena, don't, she said. Please, just don't. I'm not going to tell you it's okay, because it's not. I know it's not. But you can't let him get to you. Cody's an idiot, and everyone knows it. Lena laughed, bitter and hollow. You think this is about Cody? It's not. It's about the fact that no matter where I go, no matter what I do, I'm always the outsider, always the one people blame when things go wrong. And I'm so tired, Rhett. I'm so tired of fighting. Rhett closed the distance between them, turning her gently to face him. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. She looked exhausted, defeated. Then stop fighting, he said. What? Stop fighting. Stop trying to prove yourself to people who've already made up their minds. Stop carrying the weight of every bad thing that's ever happened to you like it's your fault. That's easy for you to say. No, it's not. You think I don't know what it's like to hate yourself? To feel like everything you touch turns to ash? I've been living with that for 5 years, Lena, and the only thing that's kept me going is the hope that maybe, someday, I'll find something worth holding on to that doesn't break. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she didn't realize had fallen. You're that thing for me, he said quietly. You're what I've been looking for. And I know you're scared. I know you're tired, but don't walk away. Not yet. Lena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. What if staying makes things worse? What if leaving does? She didn't have an answer to that. They stood there in the dim storage room, holding each other up, while outside the world kept spinning and the snow kept falling. The sheriff arrived at noon, a tall, weathered man named Ed Callahan with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He set up in Hank's office and spent the next 3 hours interviewing everyone on the ranch, one by one. Lena was called in last. She sat across from Sheriff Callahan, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight. He looked at her for a long moment, then flipped open his notebook. Miss Crowe, mind if I ask you a few questions? No, sir. How long have you been working here? About 2 months. And how would you describe your relationship with the other employees? Lena hesitated. Professional. Just professional? Mostly. What does that mean? It means some of them don't like me very much, but I do my job and I stay out of their way. Callahan nodded, writing something down. I understand there was an incident a few weeks ago. Something about stolen money. Yes, sir. But that was resolved. TJ admitted he took it. TJ Hawkins, the kid who left right after the fire. Yes. Convenient timing. Lena's stomach twisted. I don't think TJ had anything to do with the fire. Why not? Because he's not that kind of person. And what kind of person sets a fire, in your opinion? Lena met his gaze steadily. Someone who wants to hurt someone else, or scare them. You think someone was trying to hurt you? I don't know, maybe. Who would want to do that? I don't know, Lena repeated. Callahan studied her. You were inside when the fire started, that correct? Yes. And you didn't hear anything beforehand? No footsteps, no voices, nothing? I was asleep. Heavy sleeper? Not usually, but I was exhausted that night. Callahan tapped his pen against the notebook. Tell me about your relationship with Rhett Calder. Lena's pulse quickened. What about it? I'm told he's been spending a lot of time with you, helping out in the kitchen, that sort of thing. He's been helpful, that's all. Just helpful? What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Miss Crowe. I'm just trying to understand the dynamics here. The dynamics are simple. I cook, he eats, sometimes he helps me clean up. That's it. And the fact that he carried you out of a burning building doesn't change that. He did what anyone would do. Not anyone. Most people would have called for help and waited for the fire department. There is no fire department up here. By the time one got here from town, I'd have been dead. Callahan nodded slowly. Fair point. He closed his notebook. All right, Miss Crowe. That's all for now. But don't leave the area. I may have more questions. I'm not going anywhere. Good. Lena stood and walked out, her legs unsteady. Rhett was waiting in the hallway, his face tight with worry. You okay? He asked. No, but I will be. What'd he ask you? Questions? About the fire? About you? Rhett's expression darkened. About me? He wanted to know about our relationship, whether there was more going on than just... She trailed off, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. And what did you tell him? That there isn't. Rhett looked at her for a long moment. Is that true? Lena's breath caught. I don't know, is it? No, Rhett said quietly. It's not. Before she could respond, Hank appeared at the end of the hallway. Rhett, you're up. Rhett squeezed Lena's hand once, then walked past her toward the office. Lena stood there, her heart pounding, her mind racing. This was getting too complicated, too messy, too dangerous. She needed to leave, before someone else got hurt, before she dragged Rhett down with her. That night, Lena packed her bag. Lena. She moved quietly, methodically, folding her clothes and stuffing them into the worn duffel. It didn't take long. She'd never accumulated much. A few changes of clothes, a book she'd never finished reading, a photo of her mother, creased and faded. She was zipping up the bag when the door opened. Rhett stood in the doorway, his face pale. What are you doing? What does it look like? It looks like you're leaving. Good, then you're smarter than you look. Rhett stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Don't do this. I have to. No, you don't. Yes, I do. Lena's voice broke. Don't you see? This is what I do. I show up, things fall apart, and then I leave before it gets worse. It's better this way. Better for who? For everyone. For you. That's not your call to make. Yes, it is. Because I'm the one who's going to get blamed when the next bad thing happens. I'm the one everyone's going to look at and whisper about. And I can't... Her voice caught. I can't go through that again. Rhett crossed the room and grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Then don't. Stay and fight. I'm tired of fighting. Then let me fight for you. That's not fair to you. I don't care about fair. I care about you. Lena shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're strong and stubborn and too proud for your own good. I know you'd rather run than let someone see you break. I know you think you don't deserve good things, but you're wrong. You deserve everything. Stop, Lena whispered. No, because someone needs to tell you. Someone needs to look you in the eye and say you matter, that you're worth fighting for, that walking away is the worst thing you could do. What if I hurt you? Then I'll hurt, but at least I'll have had something real, something worth the pain. Lena stared at him, her chest heaving. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself fall into the hope he was offering, but she'd been burned too many times, learned too many hard lessons. I can't, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, Rhett, but I can't. She grabbed her bag and pushed past him, out the door and into the cold night. Snow was falling, soft and silent, covering the world in white. She walked across the yard toward the road, her boots crunching through the fresh powder. Behind her, she heard Rhett call her name. She didn't turn around, didn't stop, just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, the way she always did. Because that's what Lena Crowe did. She survived. She endured. She walked away before anyone could make her leave. But this time it felt different. This time it felt like she was leaving part of herself behind. She made it to the edge of the ranch before she stopped. Her chest was tight, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked back at the lights of the main house, warm and golden against the darkness. She thought about Rhett, about the way he'd looked at her, like she was something precious, about the way he'd kissed her, gentle and sure, about the way he'd said she mattered. She thought about the cookhouse, burned to the ground, about the accusations and the whispers and the weight of always being the outsider. And she thought about the alternative, about walking down this frozen road into nothing, about starting over again in another town where nobody knew her name, about spending the rest of her life running from ghosts. Her hands tightened on the strap of her duffel bag. Then, slowly, she turned around and walked back. Rhett was still standing where she'd left him, snow falling around him like something out of a dream. When he saw her coming, his face crumpled with relief. "I'm not staying because of you," Lena said when she reached him, her voice shaking. "I'm staying because I'm tired of running. I'm tired of letting other people decide what I deserve. I'm staying because for once in my life, I want to choose something for myself." "Okay," Rhett said, "but I need you to understand something. I'm not good at this, at letting people in, at trusting. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to push you away, and there are going to be days when I want to leave and you're going to have to let me. I can do that. And I need you to stop trying to save me. I don't need saving. I need someone who's willing to stand beside me while I save myself." Rhett nodded. "I can do that too." Lena looked at him, really looked at him, at the honesty in his eyes, at the vulnerability he was offering her, raw and unguarded, and she made a choice. She dropped her bag in the snow, stepped forward, and kissed him. Hard, desperate, like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. Rhett wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and kissed her back with the same intensity. They stood there in the snow, holding on to each other, two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I'm scared," Lena whispered. "Me too," Rhett said. "But we'll figure it out. Together." Lena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They walked back to the main house side by side, Rhett carrying her bag. The lights were still on, warm and welcoming. Inside they could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of dishes. Lena paused at the door. "What if they ask where I went? Tell them the truth. You needed some air." "And if they don't believe me? Then that's their problem, not yours." Lena took a deep breath, then pushed open the door. The men were gathered in the kitchen, playing cards and drinking coffee. They looked up when she walked in, but nobody said anything. Nobody asked questions. Dutch caught her eye and gave her a small nod, like he understood, like he'd been where she was and knew what it took to stay. Lena nodded back. Then she went to the stove and started making tea, her hands steady, her heart still racing but settling into a new rhythm. She was staying. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because it was her choice. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The sheriff's investigation dragged on for another week. He interviewed everyone twice, combed through the wreckage of the cookhouse, and asked questions that made everyone uncomfortable. But in the end, he couldn't find enough evidence to charge anyone. The fire was ruled suspicious but inconclusive. The case stayed open, but the sheriff had other things to deal with, and Silver Ridge Ranch was a long way from town. Cody never came back. Rumor had it he'd found work on another ranch 2 valleys over. Nobody mourned his absence. TJ sent a letter to Hank, apologizing again for the theft and saying he'd found a job in Montana. Hank read it once, then threw it in the fire. Life on the ranch returned to something resembling normal. Lena kept cooking out of the main house kitchen. The men stopped whispering. The tension eased. And slowly, quietly, Lena and Rhett built something that felt like trust. They didn't talk about the future, didn't make promises they couldn't keep. They just took it one day at a time, learning each other's rhythms, figuring out how to exist in the same space without either of them running. It wasn't perfect. There were fights, misunderstandings, days when Lena wanted to pack her bag again, and Rhett had to remind her why she'd chosen to stay. But they kept showing up, kept trying, kept choosing each other, even when it was hard. And that, Lena realized, was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, just two people deciding again and again that the other was worth the effort. One night, as they sat together on the porch watching the stars, Rhett said, I've been thinking. About what? About rebuilding the cookhouse. Lena looked at him, surprised. Why? Because you deserve a real kitchen, not some cramped space in the main house, a place that's yours. Hank can't afford that. Maybe not, but I can. Rhett, I've got money saved from before, from when I was married. I never touched it because it felt wrong, like I didn't deserve it. But maybe this is what it's for. Maybe this is how I start making things right. Lena's throat tightened. You don't have to do that. I know. But I want to. She looked at him, at the earnestness in his face, and felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not doubt, just a quiet certainty that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Okay, she said softly. Let's do it. Rhett smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. And in that moment, Lena allowed herself to believe in second chances, in new beginnings, in the possibility that sometimes, when you stop running, you find exactly what you've been looking for. But believing in second chances and actually building them were two different things. The winter dragged on, brutal and unrelenting. The snow piled higher, the wind cut deeper, and the cold seeped into bones and buildings alike. Lena kept cooking, kept working, kept showing up day after day in that cramped kitchen that smelled like old grease and desperation. And Rhett kept his promise. He started drawing up plans for the new cookhouse, sketching layouts on scraps of paper during his lunch breaks, measuring the footprint of the old building on days when the weather allowed. Hank was skeptical at first. You sure about this? He asked Rhett one evening, looking over the rough blueprints spread across the kitchen table. That's a lot of money to sink into a place you don't own. I'm sure, Rhett said. What if things don't work out? Then they don't work out. But at least I'll have tried. Hank looked at Lena, who was washing dishes at the sink, her back to them. What do you think? Lena glanced over her shoulder. I think it's his money. He can do what he wants with it. That's not what I asked. She dried her hands on a towel and turned to face him. I think it's crazy. I think it's risky. And I think if anyone else offered to do it, I'd tell them to save their money. She paused. But it's Rhett, so I trust him. The words hung in the air. Simple. Honest. Terrifying. Rhett looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. Then he turned back to Hank. We'll start as soon as the ground thaws. Should be ready by late spring. All right, Hank said slowly. But I'm helping, and I'm not taking no for an answer. This ranch benefits. We all pitch in. Dutch nodded from his spot by the fire. He's right. We'll all help. And just like that, the decision was made. The new cookhouse would be built, not just by Rhett, but by all of them. A collective act of faith in something better. Lena went to bed that night, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope. She'd learned hope was too fragile to rely on, but something steadier, something like purpose. The weeks that followed were hard in different ways. Lena and Rhett fell into a rhythm that was equal parts comfortable and complicated. They didn't live together. Lena still slept in the small room off the main house kitchen, and Rhett stayed in the bunkhouse with the other men. But they spent most of their waking hours together, and everyone on the ranch knew something had shifted between them. They didn't hide it, didn't flaunt it either. It just was. Some nights, after everyone else had gone to bed, they'd sit together in the empty kitchen, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm hours ago and talking about things that mattered. Their pasts, their fears, the people they'd lost, and the versions of themselves they'd left behind. I think about them every day, Rhett said one night, his voice quiet. Sarah and Jacob. I used to think that meant I hadn't moved on, that I was stuck. But now I think maybe it just means I loved them, and that doesn't go away just because they're gone. Lena reached across the table and took his hand. It shouldn't go away. But it makes things complicated with us. Everything about us is complicated. Rhett smiled, sad and tired. Yeah, it is. Does that bother you? No. Complicated means real, and I've had enough of pretending things are simple when they're not. Lena squeezed his hand. Me too. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the wind howling outside and the old house creaking around them. Do you think we're crazy? Lena asked eventually. Trying to build something here? Probably, but the alternative is worse. Which is? Giving up, walking away, spending the rest of our lives wondering what if. Lena nodded slowly. I've done enough of that. So have I. Then I guess we're stuck with each other. Rhett laughed, a real laugh, the kind that lit up his whole face. Could be worse. Could be better too. Yeah, but we'll get there. And somehow, sitting in that drafty kitchen at 2 a.m. with a man who'd been a stranger 4 months ago, Lena believed him. But belief, she learned, didn't protect you from reality. It was mid-March when the letter arrived. Hank brought it in with the rest of the mail, a thin envelope with Lena's name typed neatly on the front. No return address, just a postmark from Ridgefield, the town she'd fled 3 years ago. Lena stared at it like it was a snake coiled on the counter. "You gonna open it?" Hank asked. "I don't know. Might be important. Or it might be nothing." But they both knew it wasn't nothing. You didn't get anonymous letters from your past unless someone wanted to remind you of things you'd rather forget. Lena waited until everyone had left for the day before she opened it. Her hand shook as she tore the envelope, pulling out a single sheet of paper covered in cramped handwriting. It read, "Lena, you don't know me, but I know you. I worked at the diner with you 3 years ago. I never said anything at the time, but I should have. Marcus, the owner's nephew, he's the one who stole that money. Everyone knew it, but no one wanted to cross the family. You got blamed because you were easy to blame. You were the outsider, the one who didn't fit. I'm sorry for not speaking up. I'm sorry for letting you take the fall. Marcus is in jail now, got caught embezzling from another place. Thought you should know you were right all along. I hope you're doing okay wherever you are. You deserved better. Jamie." Lena read it twice, then a third time. Then she set it down and walked outside, her legs unsteady, her chest tight. She stood in the snow, breathing hard, trying to process what she'd just read. Vindication. After 3 years of carrying the shame and the doubt and the what-ifs, here it was in black and white. Proof that she'd been right, that she'd been innocent, that the people who judged her had been wrong. It should have felt good, should have felt like closure. But it didn't. It felt hollow, empty, like learning the truth 3 years too late to matter. "Lena?" She turned. Rhett was walking toward her, concern etched across his face. "What's wrong?" She handed him the letter without a word. He read it, his expression darkening with every line. "Son of a bitch," he muttered when he finished. "All this time and nobody said anything." "They knew, Rhett. They all knew, and they let me walk out of there thinking I was guilty." "That's not on you, that's on them." "I know, but it doesn't change anything, does it? I still lost 3 years, still spent all that time running from something that wasn't even my fault. And for what? A letter that says, 'Sorry, we screwed up'?" Rhett stepped closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "It changes everything. Because now you know, now you don't have to carry that anymore." "Don't I? Because it feels pretty heavy right now." "Then let me help you carry it." Lena looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Why? Why do you care so much?" "Because I know what it's like to carry guilt that isn't yours. And I know what it does to you. How it eats away at everything good until there's nothing left. And I don't want that for you. What if it's too late? It's not. Not if you don't let it be." Lena closed her eyes, leaning into him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her steady while she fell apart in the cold mountain air. And for the first time since she'd read that letter, she let herself feel it. The anger, the grief, the bitter, aching unfairness of it all. But she also felt something else, relief, not because the truth had come out, but because she didn't have to face it alone. That night over dinner, Lena told everyone about the letter. She didn't plan to, didn't want to make it a thing. But Rhett gave her a look that said she should, and she trusted him enough to follow his lead. The men listened in silence as she explained what had happened 3 years ago. The accusation, the humiliation, the way she'd been driven out of town with nothing but her name dragged through the mud. When she finished, Dutch was the first to speak. "That's a hell of a thing to carry." "Yeah," Lena said. "It was." "But you don't have to carry it anymore," Hank said. "Not here. You're one of us now." Lena blinked, surprised. "I am? You've been here 4 months. You survived a fire, a witch hunt, and the worst winter in 20 years. If that doesn't make you one of us, I don't know what does." The other men murmured agreement. Even the new guy, a quiet kid named Sam who'd replaced TJ, nodded. Lena felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain this time, something warmer, something like belonging. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank us yet, Hank said with a wry smile. Spring's coming, and that means work. Lots of it. Everyone groaned, and the moment passed into laughter and complaints about fences that needed mending and cattle that needed tending. But Lena caught Rhett's eye across the table, and he smiled at her, small, private, real. And she smiled back. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, like it wasn't sure the mountains were ready for it. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown earth and dead grass. The ice on the creek cracked and groaned, then finally gave way to rushing water. The air warmed just enough to make the cold bearable instead of brutal. And true to his word, Rhett started building. He worked every spare moment he had. Mornings before breakfast, evenings after dinner, weekends when the weather allowed. Hank and Dutch helped, along with Sam and a rotating crew of whoever had time. They cleared the debris from the old cookhouse, laid a new foundation, framed the walls. Lena watched from the main house, equal parts awed and terrified. This was real. This was happening. Someone was building something for her, not out of pity or obligation, but because they wanted to. It was the most frightening gift she'd ever been given. One afternoon, Rhett found her standing at the window, staring at the half-built structure. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That it's too much." "Too much what?" "Too much everything. Too much effort, too much money, too much risk." Rhett leaned against the counter beside her. "You want me to stop?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." She turned to face him. "What if I leave? What if things fall apart and I can't stay? Then what? Then you leave, and the cookhouse stays, and whoever comes after you gets to use it. That's a terrible business plan." "Good thing I'm not running a business." Lena shook her head, almost smiling. "You're impossible. And you're stubborn. Guess we're even." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "Stop trying to protect me from my own choices. I know what I'm doing, and even if it doesn't work out the way we hope, it'll still be worth it." "How do you know?" "Because I've lived the alternative. I've spent 5 years doing nothing, risking nothing, feeling nothing. And that's not living. That's just surviving, and I'm done surviving." Lena looked at him, really looked at him. At the determination in his eyes, at the quiet strength he carried, at the man he was becoming, one choice at a time. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." The weeks turned into months, and the cookhouse slowly took shape. The walls went up, solid and straight. The roof went on, keeping out the rain and the last of the snow. Windows were installed, letting in light that made the space feel bigger than it was. Dutch built shelves along one wall, sturdy and level. Sam helped Rhett construct a long prep table from reclaimed pine, sanding it smooth and sealing it with oil until it gleamed. Lena started spending more time there as it neared completion, measuring spaces for equipment, imagining where things would go. She'd stand in the middle of the empty room and spin slowly, taking it all in, hardly believing this was real. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," Dutch said one afternoon, catching her doing exactly that. Lena laughed, embarrassed. "I'm just trying to picture it finished. It's going to be good. Better than the old place. The old place had character. The old place had mice and a roof that leaked. This one's got neither." "Fair point." Dutch leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You know what I like about you, Lena?" "What?" "You don't take the easy way out. Most people would have left after that fire. Hell, most people would have left after Cody's first joke. But you stayed. You fought. That takes guts." Lena felt her throat tighten. "I didn't have much choice." "There's always a choice. You just made the hard one." He pushed off the frame. "Anyway, thought you should know we're glad you're here. All of us. Even the ones who don't say it." He left before she could respond, leaving Lena standing alone in the half-finished cookhouse with tears in her eyes and a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine streaming through the windows. The cookhouse was finished by late May. It wasn't fancy, just timber and stone, a wide fireplace at one end, and big windows that let in the light. But it was solid, well-built, made to last. The day they finished, Hank organized a small celebration. Nothing elaborate, just beer and barbecue and the men sitting around talking and laughing as the sun set behind the mountains. Lena cooked her first meal in the new kitchen, testing out the stove and the prep space and the way everything fit together. It felt right. It felt like home. "Speech," someone called out, probably Sam, who'd gotten into the beer a little early. "No speeches," Lena said, laughing. "Come on, you gotta say something." Lena looked around at the men gathered there, at Dutch with his graying beard and steady eyes, at Sam with his crooked grin, at Hank looking older but content, at Rhett standing off to the side, watching her with that quiet intensity that still made her heart skip. "All right," she said finally, "but I'm keeping it short." Everyone quieted down, waiting. "I came here 5 months ago with nothing," Lena said. "Just a duffel bag and a truck that died before I even made it to the ranch. I wasn't looking for a home. Wasn't looking for family. I was just looking for work, for a place to lay low until I figured out what came next." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But somewhere along the way, this place became more than that. You became more than that. You gave me a chance when you didn't have to. You stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. And you built me this." She gestured at the cookhouse behind her. "Not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Because you saw something in me worth investing in. And I don't have words for what that means." Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, blinking hard. "So thank you, all of you, for reminding me that not everyone is out to tear you down. That some people actually show up. That maybe, just maybe, good things can happen if you're brave enough to stay." There was a moment of silence, then Dutch raised his beer. "To Lena, and to not running when things get hard." "To Lena," everyone echoed, raising their drinks. Lena raised her own bottle, her vision blurry with tears. Rhett caught her eye and mouthed, "You okay?" She nodded, more than okay. For the first time in 3 years, maybe in her whole life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed and the ranch was quiet, Lena walked through the new cookhouse one more time. She ran her hands over the counters Rhett had installed, the shelves Dutch had built, the table they'd all worked on together. She stood in the back room, bigger than the closet she'd had before, with a real bed and a window that looked out at the mountains, and tried to imagine herself here, sleeping here, living here, building a life here. It didn't feel real, but it also didn't feel impossible. "Thought I'd find you here." Lena turned. Rhett stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking at her with that expression she'd come to know, half affection, half exasperation. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Nah. Too wound up, I guess." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You?" "Same." He crossed to the window and stood beside her, both of them looking out at the dark silhouette of the mountains against the star-filled sky. "You did good tonight," Rhett said. "That speech. I fumbled through it. You spoke from the heart. That's better than any polished speech." Lena smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not. I'm just good at faking it." They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Rhett said, "I need to tell you something." Lena's stomach tightened. "Okay. I'm not good at this. At relationships, at letting people in. She was easy. We grew up together. We knew each other inside and out. There was no mystery, no figuring it out. It just was." "Rhett?" "Let me finish." He turned to face her. "With you, it's different, harder. You've got walls I don't know how to climb. And I've got ghosts I don't know how to let go of. And there are days when I look at you and think, maybe this is too complicated. Maybe we're both too broken to make this work." Lena's heart sank. "If you're trying to let me down easy, I'm not. I'm trying to tell you that even with all that, even knowing how hard this is, I still want it. I still want you. And I know that's not fair. I know you didn't sign up for someone with this much baggage, but I'm asking anyway." He took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "I'm asking you to take a chance on me," he said quietly. "On us. I can't promise it'll be easy. Can't promise I won't mess up or that there won't be days when we both want to quit. But I can promise I'll show up every single day for as long as you'll have me." Lena looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "You're an idiot. You know that?" Rhett's face fell. "What?" "I'm already taking a chance on you, you idiot. Have been since the night you pulled me out of that fire. Since the night you told me the truth about Ridgefield. Since every single time you showed up when I needed you. even when I didn't ask. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. You think I don't know you're broken? She said. You think I don't see the way you stare off into nothing sometimes, thinking about them? You think I don't notice when you flinch at loud noises, or can't sleep, or look at me like you're afraid I'm going to disappear? Rhett's throat worked. Lena, I see all of it, and I'm still here. Because you're not the only one who's broken, Rhett. You're not the only one carrying ghosts. And maybe that's exactly why this works. Because we don't need each other to be perfect. We just need each other to be real. She cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing over his stubbled jaw. So yes, she said, I'm taking a chance on you. On us. And yeah, it's going to be hard. Yeah, we're going to mess up, but we'll figure it out together. Rhett closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. When he opened them again, they were wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. I love you, he said, his voice rough. I didn't think I'd ever say that to anyone again. Didn't think I had it in me. But I do. And I need you to know that. Lena's breath caught. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. I love you too, she whispered. And then he kissed her, and she kissed him back, and for a while nothing else mattered. Not the past, not the fear, not the uncertainty of what came next. Just this. Just them. Just the choice they were making, again and again, to build something together. But even good things don't last forever. And just when Lena thought she'd finally found her footing, the world threw her another curveball. It was early June when Hank called her into his office. He looked tired, older somehow. His shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. What's wrong? Lena asked, her stomach already sinking. Nothing's wrong, not exactly. Hank sighed. I got an offer to sell the ranch. Lena felt like she'd been punched. What? Developer out of Denver wants to turn the place into some kind of luxury resort. Ski lodge in the winter, hiking retreat in the summer. Offered me more money than this place is worth. You're not seriously considering it. I don't know. Maybe I am. Hank, I'm getting old, Lena. I'm tired. My knees are shot. My back hurts more days than it doesn't. And I'm running this place on fumes and stubbornness. This winter almost killed me. And the one before that. I don't know how many more I've got in me. Lena stared at him, her mind racing. What about the men? What about their jobs? They'll find other work. They always do. Dutch has been talking about retiring anyway. Sam's young. He'll land on his feet. And me? Hank looked at her, and there was something like regret in his eyes. You're young. You're talented. You'll land on your feet too. That's not the point. Then what is? The point is this place matters. To all of us. It's not just a ranch. It's home. Home is wherever you make it, Lena. That's easy to say when you're the one choosing to leave. Hank didn't respond, just looked out the window at the mountains, his face unreadable. Lena left the office feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under her. She found Rhett in the new cookhouse fixing a hinge on one of the cabinets. Hank's selling, she said without preamble. Rhett's hands stilled. What? Someone made him an offer. He's thinking about taking it. When? I don't know. Soon, probably. He looks like he's already made up his mind. Rhett set down his tools and turned to face her. What do you want to do? I don't know. Stay? Leave? It doesn't matter, does it? If Hank sells, we're done either way. Not necessarily. What do you mean? Rhett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What if we didn't stay here? Lena frowned. I don't understand. What if we left? Together, found our own place? Our own place? Yeah, a restaurant maybe, or a roadside diner. Something small. Something that's ours. Lena stared at him. Are you serious? Dead serious. I've got the money from the sale of my house back in Wyoming. It's just been sitting there because I didn't know what to do with it. You've got the skills, the experience. We could make it work. That's insane. Maybe. But so was building a cookhouse for someone I barely knew. And that worked out okay. Lena didn't know what to say. The idea was terrifying, exhilarating, completely ridiculous. And yet, where would we even go? She asked. Wherever you want. Could be here in the mountains. Could be somewhere else entirely. Doesn't matter, as long as we're doing it together. Lena looked around the cookhouse, at the space Rhett had built with his own hands, at the life they'd started to create here. And she realized something. Home wasn't this building, wasn't this ranch, wasn't even this valley tucked between mountains that tried to kill you half the year. Home was the person standing in front of her, offering her a future she'd never dared to imagine. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "Yeah, let's do it." Rhett's face lit up. "Really?" "Really. But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. No half measures. We plan it out. We save up. We find the right location. We do it smart." "Agreed." He crossed the room and kissed her, hard and fast and full of joy. And Lena kissed him back, laughing against his mouth, feeling lighter than she had in years. They didn't leave immediately. Hank's sale took months to finalize. Lawyers and inspections and paperwork that seemed to multiply every time you looked at it. And in the meantime, life on the ranch continued. Lena cooked, Rhett worked. They spent their evenings planning their future, sketching out ideas on napkins and arguing good-naturedly about everything from menu items to color schemes. "We need comfort food," Lena said one night, tapping her pencil against the table. "Stuff that reminds people of home. Meatloaf, pot roast, chicken and dumplings." "Boring," Rhett said. "Boring sells. Nobody drives up a mountain for experimental cuisine. Nobody drives up a mountain for the same thing they can get anywhere else either. So what do you suggest?" "Something that makes us different. Regional stuff. Game meats, maybe. Elk, venison, trout from local streams." Lena considered this. "That could work, but we'd need reliable suppliers." "We'd figure it out. We always do." She smiled at that. At the easy way he said "we." At the assumption that they'd be figuring things out together for a long time to come. Dutch thought they were crazy. "You're really going to leave a steady paycheck to open a restaurant in the middle of nowhere?" "Yep," Rhett said. "That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the dumbest. Haven't decided which yet." "Could be both," Lena offered. Dutch laughed. "Yeah, probably is." He clapped Rhett on the shoulder. "But if anyone can pull it off, it's you two. You're both too stubborn to fail." Hank thought they were brave. "I admire what you're doing," he said one evening after dinner. "Taking a risk like that. Building something from nothing." "We learned from the best," Lena said pointedly. Hank smiled, sad and tired. "Maybe, but I'm also the guy who's selling out instead of fighting to keep what I built. Not sure that's the best role model." "You're not selling out. You're making a smart decision about your future. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah, there is." Lena set down her dish towel. "You gave this place 40 years, Hank. 40 years of waking up before dawn and working until you couldn't stand. 40 years of barely breaking even, of fighting the weather and the market and your own body telling you to quit. You don't owe this place anything else. You've earned the right to rest." Hank's eyes were wet when he looked at her. "When did you get so wise?" I'm just good at faking it." He laughed at that, really laughed, the sound echoing through the empty kitchen. And when the day finally came for Hank to sign the papers, Lena and Rhett were there. They stood with him in his office while he put his name on the dotted line, officially ending an era. "Well," Hank said, setting down the pen, "that's that." "What are you going to do now?" Lena asked. "Thinking about Florida. Got a sister down there who's been bugging me to visit. Might stay a while, might stay forever. Haven't decided yet." "You'll hate Florida," Dutch said from the doorway. "Too hot, too flat, too many people." "Maybe, but at least my knees won't hurt every time it snows." They all laughed at that, but there was sadness underneath it. An acknowledgement that things were changing, that this chapter was closing. And a few days later, when the moving trucks came to take Hank's things, Lena felt it hit her all over again. The impermanence of everything, the way life just kept moving forward, whether you were ready or not. "You okay?" Rhett asked, watching her watch Hank drive away for the last time. "Yeah, just the end of an era, you know?" "Yeah, I know." He took her hand and they stood there together as the dust from Hank's truck settled on the empty road. "So," Rhett said after a while. "Ready to start our era?" Lena squeezed his hand. "Yeah, I think I am." They found their spot 2 months later, a small building on a 2-lane highway that cut through the mountains about 30 miles south of Silver Ridge. It had been a gas station once, then a convenience store, then nothing at all for the better part of a decade. The roof sagged, the windows were broken, the parking lot was more weeds than pavement, but Rhett saw potential, and Lena saw possibility. "It's perfect," Rhett said, standing in the middle of the empty space, his voice echoing off the bare walls. "It's a disaster," Lena corrected. "Same thing." She couldn't argue with that. They bought it for less than they'd hoped to spend, which left them money for renovations, and they needed every penny. The place was barely standing, held together by rust and stubbornness. They spent that winter gutting it, tearing out old fixtures and rotted drywall, ripping up linoleum that had probably been installed before Lena was born, hauling out trash and debris until their backs ached and their hands were covered in cuts and splinters. It was brutal work, exhausting. The kind of labor that made you question every decision that had led you here, but it was also theirs. Oh, every nail they drove, every board they hung, every decision about where the kitchen would go and how big the dining area should be, it was all theirs. And slowly, painfully, the place began to take shape. Rhett installed the kitchen himself, working from plans he'd drawn up and modified a dozen times. Commercial-grade equipment bought secondhand from restaurant supply stores. A 6-burner stove, a flat-top grill, a walk-in cooler that took 3 days and 4 grown men to install. Lena focused on the front of the house. She picked out tables and chairs from thrift stores and estate sales, mixing and matching until she had a collection that looked intentional instead of desperate. She painted the walls a warm, buttery yellow that reminded her of sunrise. She hung curtains she'd sewn herself, simple and clean. Dutch came by to help sometimes, bringing Sam with him. They'd work for a few hours, then sit around drinking beer and giving unsolicited advice about everything from plumbing to color schemes. "You're making it too nice," Dutch said one day, looking at the freshly painted walls. "How can it be too nice?" Lena asked. "Because it's a roadside diner, not a fancy restaurant. People are going to expect formica and sticky tables. You give them sunshine yellow and hand-sewn curtains, they're going to think you're charging too much. Or they'll think we care about the details. Maybe. Or maybe they'll just think you're weird," Lena laughed. "Wouldn't be the first time." They worked through that winter and into spring, racing against their own impatience and dwindling chickens. There were days when nothing went right. When the plumbing backed up, or the electrical work failed inspection, or they discovered structural damage that would cost thousands to fix. There were nights when Lena lay awake in the small apartment above the restaurant, 2 rooms and a bathroom that barely qualified as functional, and wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. If they'd thrown away steady jobs in a place they knew for a pipe dream that would bankrupt them before they served their first meal. But then morning would come, and Rhett would already be downstairs, coffee brewing, radio playing, working on whatever problem had seemed insurmountable the night before. And she'd go down to join him, and they'd tackle it together, one small fix at a time. And somehow, impossibly, they got there. The restaurant, they'd named it The Ridge after a long debate that involved too much wine and not enough sleep, opened on a Friday in late April. They didn't advertise much, just a sign by the road and word of mouth from the handful of people who'd watched them work all winter. Lena didn't know what to expect. Maybe a dozen customers on a good day. Maybe none at all. But when she unlocked the door at 6 a.m. that first morning, there was already a line. Not a long one. Just 6 or 7 people, most of them locals who'd driven out of curiosity or kindness. But they came in, and they sat down, and they ordered. And Lena cooked. She made eggs the way her mother had taught her, scrambled soft and creamy, never dry. She made bacon crispy and pancakes fluffy and coffee so strong it could wake the dead. She moved through the kitchen with the muscle memory of 1,000 breakfasts, her hands sure and steady even though her heart was racing. Rhett worked the floor, pouring coffee and taking orders and chatting with customers like he'd been doing it his whole life. He was good at it, Lena realized, good at making people feel welcome, good at remembering names and preferences and asking the right questions. By noon, they'd served 30 people. By dinner, 50. And by the time they locked the doors at 9 p.m., Lena was so exhausted she could barely stand. But she was smiling. "We did it," she said, leaning against the counter. Rhett wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Yeah, we did. Think they'll come back? If the food's half as good as I think it is, yeah, they'll come back." And they did. Word spread slowly at first. A trucker who stopped for breakfast told another trucker. A family on vacation posted a picture on social media. A food blogger from Denver drove up and wrote a glowing review that brought in a wave of curious diners. Within 3 months, the Ridge was doing steady business. Within 6 months, they were profitable. Within a year, they were thriving. It wasn't easy. There were still hard days, days when the freezer broke down or a supplier flaked or a bad review tanked their reservations for a week. Days when Lena and Rhett fought about money or staffing or whether to expand the menu. But those days got fewer. And the good days, the days when the tables were full and the tips were generous and customers left saying it was the best meal they'd had in months, those days made up for everything. Lena hired help eventually, a young woman named Maria who could work the grill and didn't mind early mornings. A kid named Danny who bussed tables and washed dishes and reminded Lena of TJ with his nervous energy and eager-to-please attitude. Rhett handled the business side, payroll and inventory, and dealing with health inspectors who seemed to delight in finding minor violations. He was good at it, methodical and patient in ways Lena wasn't. They made a good team. And somewhere along the way, between the chaos of running a restaurant and the exhaustion of working 18-hour days, they built a life. It was a year and a half after they'd opened the Ridge when Rhett asked Lena to marry him. They were closing up for the night, wiping down tables and counting the register, when he pulled a ring out of his pocket, simple, silver, with a small stone that caught the light. "I know we said we'd take things slow," he said, "and I know you don't like big gestures, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life doing this, with you, building things, making things, fighting about whether to add pie to the menu." "We're adding pie to the menu," Lena interrupted. "See? This. I want this forever. If you'll have me." Lena looked at the ring, then at him, then back at the ring. "You're really bad at proposals," she said, but she was smiling. "Is that a yes? Did I say no?" "Lena?" "Yes, you idiot. Yes." Rhett's face broke into the widest grin she'd ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, and kissed her, deep and slow and full of promise. "I love you," he said when they finally pulled apart. "I love you too, even though your timing is terrible." "My timing is perfect. We just had our best week yet. Seemed like good luck. Or you're just impatient. That too." They got married that summer in a small ceremony on the ridge overlooking the Ridge. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Dutch was there looking uncomfortable in a suit, but wearing it anyway. Hank flew up from Florida, tanned and relaxed and barely recognizable, without the weight of the ranch on his shoulders. Sam came with his new girlfriend. Maria and Danny came, and half a dozen regulars from the restaurant who'd become friends. Lena's mother came too. They'd reconnected 6 months earlier, a tentative phone call that had turned into weekly conversations and eventually an invitation to visit. The reunion hadn't been easy. There was too much history, too many years of silence. But they were trying, and that was enough. It wasn't a fancy wedding. Lena wore a simple white dress she'd found in a boutique in town. Rhett wore a suit he'd owned for years and had tailored to actually fit. They stood on a patch of grass overlooking the valley, mountains rising on all sides, and promised to keep choosing each other, to keep showing up, to keep building a life together, one day at a time. There was no minister. Dutch officiated, reading from a script Lena had written and Rhett had edited. The vows were simple, honest, a little funny in places because that's who they were. And when Dutch pronounced them married and Rhett kissed her, Lena felt something she hadn't felt since she was a kid, before life got hard, before she learned that the world could be cruel. She felt hope, real hope, the kind that wasn't fragile or fleeting but rooted deep, like a tree that had weathered storms and come out stronger. The reception was held at the Ridge, because where else would it be? They pushed the tables together and served the same comfort food they made every day. Meatloaf and mashed potatoes, roasted chicken, cornbread, pie. 3 kinds, because Lena had won that argument. People ate and drank and danced to music playing from someone's phone. Dutch told embarrassing stories about Rhett from their ranch days. Hank gave a toast that made half the room cry. Maria and Danny handled the kitchen so Lena could actually enjoy her own wedding. And late in the evening, when most of the guests had left and the sun was setting behind the mountains, Lena and Rhett stood outside the Ridge, looking at the life they'd built. "You happy?" Rhett asked, his arm around her waist. "Yeah," Lena said, "I really am." "No regrets?" "Not a one." "Not even about the pie?" she laughed. Especially not about the pie. He kissed the top of her head, and they stood there in the fading light, two people who'd been broken and lost, and had somehow found their way to each other. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. There would still be hard days and fights and moments when they both wanted to quit. But they had this place, this life, this choice they kept making to show up for each other. And that was everything. Years later, when people asked Lena how she'd ended up here, running a successful restaurant with her husband in the middle of nowhere, she'd tell them the truth. I got lucky, she'd say, met the right person at the right time. But that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was messier, harder, more complicated than luck. The whole truth was that she'd been broken, that she'd spent years running from herself, from her past, from the person she thought she was supposed to be, that she'd learned the hard way that shame doesn't wash off easy and fear doesn't go away just because you want it to. The whole truth was that healing isn't a destination. It's a practice, something you have to choose again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The whole truth was that love doesn't fix you, but it can hold you steady while you fix yourself. It can give you a reason to try when trying feels impossible. And the whole truth was that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay, is fight, is refuse to let the world convince you that you don't belong, because you do belong. We all do. Not because we're perfect, not because we've earned it, not because we've overcome every obstacle or healed every wound, but because we're here and we're trying. And that's enough. That has always been enough. Lena learned that lesson in a cookhouse on a frozen mountain ranch. She learned it from a man who'd lost everything and was trying to find his way back. She learned it from the work of her own hands, and the stubborn refusal to quit when quitting would have been easier. And she carried it with her for the rest of her life. Not as a trophy, not as proof of anything, just as a quiet truth she whispered to herself on hard days, when the world felt heavy and the past felt close and the future felt uncertain. You survived, you stayed, you built something worth keeping, and that was more than enough. It was everything. The years passed the way years do. Some fast, some slow, all of them adding up to a life. The ridge grew and evolved. They added a patio for summer dining, expanded the menu to include those regional dishes Rhett had insisted on, hired more staff as business picked up. Lena became known for her pies. Rhett became known for his coffee and his ability to remember every regular's usual order. Together, they became fixtures in the community. The couple who'd taken a gamble on a broken-down building and turned it into something special. They had their share of struggles. A kitchen fire that set them back 3 months. A brutal winter that kept customers away for weeks. A health scare with Rhett that turned out to be nothing but aged them both a decade in the span of a few terrifying days. But they got through it. Together. The way they got through everything. And on quiet mornings, when Lena was alone in the kitchen before anyone else arrived, she'd sometimes think about the woman who'd walked up that frozen road to Silver Ridge Ranch 4 years earlier, desperate, alone, convinced she didn't deserve good things. She'd think about how far she'd come, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. And she'd smile. Because that woman, broken and scared and running from herself, she'd done something extraordinary. She'd stayed. She'd fought. She'd chosen to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worth fighting for. And in the end, that's what changed everything. Not luck. Not fate. Not some grand intervention from the universe. Just a woman deciding she was tired of running. A man deciding he was tired of hiding. And two broken people choosing to build something together, one day at a time, one meal at a time, one small act of courage at a time. That's all it ever was. That's all it needed to be. And if you asked Lena what she'd learned from all of it, from the fire and the accusations and the long, brutal winters, she'd tell you this. Life doesn't owe you anything. The world isn't fair. Bad things happen to good people, and sometimes there's no justice, no closure, no satisfying resolution. But that doesn't mean you give up. It means you find your people, you build your home, you create meaning where there wasn't any before. It means you show up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because in the end, that's all we have. The choice to stay or go, to fight or surrender, to believe we're worth saving or to let the world convince us otherwise. Lena chose to stay. And that choice, that single, terrifying, beautiful choice, made all the difference.